Welcome back to the Alec Lewis Show. I am your host, Alec Lewis. This is episode 149, recording on Wednesday, March 4th, from the Alabama home studios. I am here in my short sleeve shirt, enjoying the very normal weather for a couple weeks, but not really because I've been inside on the phone, trying to figure out what the next couple of weeks for this organization is going to look like. And it's already been pretty active. I don't expect it to slow down a ton, but am here to talk about all of it today for this episode of the Alec Lewis Show. We're going to get into the quarterback conversation, obviously. We'll talk a little bit about Jonathan Greenard in the middle. And then at the end, we will talk, get into Jalen Naylor, Eric Wilson, a bunch of other conversations and topics related to this team as free agency and the legal tampering period begins next Monday. Obviously coming off the week in Indianapolis, I said on the podcast that we usually do 2 times a week that I would do shows from Indy, but there were some late nights. There was a lot of conversation, and to give you guys the most clear and honest and factual picture, I felt like it was more worthwhile to wait to take in everything, to discern. And then I cover the team for The Athletic, and I do my writing over there, and that is my foremost responsibility. That won't change. And so, that's why we are now recording on Wednesday and did not record last Wednesday. Just wanted to give you guys that update. If you're new here and you don't know me, again, we've done this show for 2 years now. I view it for me as a way to speak to you guys directly and to just talk in a different medium that I have a ton of fun with. You can find us on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, you can hit the subscribe button. It helps us out a ton. And if you're listening on Apple or Spotify or iHeart, wherever you get your podcast, you can rate and review, and I think follow us so you get future episodes, and we appreciate that. But if you missed it, there are stories at The Athletic from what I heard at the Combine. There was one Monday, one Tuesday. Did a little bit for Wednesday on the Kyler Murray topic, which we'll talk about in depth here. And then I've got a feature coming later this week on a topic that I think is relevant and important that I put some work into. So stay tuned and keep checking theathletic.com for that. This show is presented by First Resource Bank. I had lunch with those guys coming back from the Combine because Tim Siegley, Aaron Siegley, Charlie Anderson, they run the bank. They care about the community, and they know that the Vikings are a big part of the community, so they wanted to know what's going on and what the circumstance currently is at quarterback. So we had lunch, I think, Monday, and I was trying to keep them abreast, but they're really good people. Part of the reason I partner with them for this show is because of just how easy they are to get along with. And then their banking platform for me, moving up to Minnesota, where I do live, contrary to some people on Twitter and what they think. I endure the winter just like all of you guys. Their online banking platform has been phenomenal for me to transition to and moving up there. So First Resource Bank, the information for them is in the description below. All right, 3 minutes. You guys are probably frustrated at me. You can throw those frustrations in the comments. I can take the brunt of that, and that's the accountability that I, absorb myself. But we'll get right into the quarterback conversation. So, in Indianapolis, weaving the hotels, whether it was the JW Marriott or the Westin or the actual Marriott or the Hyatt or the Omni. I put in a lot of steps in Indianapolis, and my body probably needed that and being outside. But the quarterback was the topic. I mean, I run into an agent I know. What are they going to do? You run into another team person. Here's what I'm hearing they're going to do. You run into Vikings person, and I mean, the quarterback was the topic that you're dancing around all the time. So you guys are sitting and wondering, okay, the Kyler Murray news surfaced Tuesday that the Arizona Cardinals are planning to release him. What does that mean for the Vikings? Well, here's what I'd say on Kyler Murray. The Vikings recognize his raw talent, and anybody listening to the show, you guys might roll your eyes at that or be frustrated about it, or you might really like it. I think there are a lot of polarizing views on Kyler Murray, but the raw talent on the tape is pretty undeniable as a playmaker. He can layer the football. He is accurate. I mean, you go listen to anything Colt McCoy has ever said about Kyler Murray, and Colt was in a quarterback room with him and is a really aware in how he sees his stuff, he will talk about the accuracy of Kyler Murray. I mean, with Kyler, there is is he a shotgun guy? What does his health look like? What would his fit be in a system that likes to throw the football over the middle of the field and could it in 2025? All of those conversations are relevant. They exist. There are a lot of perspectives on all sides, but I do know there is immense internal support from a lot of different people on Kyler Murray. And I would say that even some of the Vikings players appreciate what Kyler has done within the NFL. So the fact that he would be available and given the offset language in his contract would be available for $1.3 million on the ultimate minimum, coming with an immense amount of motivation to prove a lot of the narratives wrong, in many ways similar to Sam Darnold arriving in 2024 with some of the chip on his shoulder. Like I could definitely see it happening because it checks a lot of the boxes that the Vikings are after when you're talking about a guy who has been productive, a guy who has the arm talent, a guy who would have support, a guy who would be motivated. And I mean, really, for all of the perceived flaws that are understandable with Kyler Murray, whether it's, you hear a lot of the personality stuff, you hear the video game narrative will never die. I mean, in many ways, kind of like the Sam Darnold seeing ghost narrative. But the one thing about Kyler that you can say is that if you look at any of the metrics or just watch the tape going back to 2024, like the playmaking stuff exists. There is also on the tape plays that make you really scratch your head or shake your head, and that's kind of the realm of quarterback pursuit that the Vikings are in. None of these guys, whether it is Geno Smith, whether it is Derek Carr, Kirk Cousins, none of them are perfect. And that's part of the reason why the Vikings have been connected to so many of these quarterbacks over the past couple of weeks, is in many ways to prevent what happened last year from happening again. You guys might be asking us, Alec, what do you mean by that? Well, the Vikings had their eyes set on Daniel Jones. Understandably, he was in the building. He loved being there. And the Vikings felt strongly that he liked their infrastructure. So when he chose Indianapolis, there wasn't a ton of backup plan there, and not a very refined, I would say, T's crossed and I's dotted. Here's what we're going to do if this happens, because of the conviction that Daniel Jones would be back. Whereas this time around, the Vikings wanted to give themselves as many outs as possible. If the Cardinals didn't cut Kyler Murray, then what would they do? If the Las Vegas Raiders didn't release Geno Smith, then what would they do? If Kirk Cousins wanted a certain amount of money to sign elsewhere, then what would the Vikings do? And having answers for plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D, plan E, plan F is part of the reason why the connection to a lot of these guys has happened. And Rob Brzezinski, who is the interim general manager right now, really didn't mince words, or I mean, it wasn't trying to throw a smokescreen. When in Indianapolis, Rob said, we're going to explore all possibilities. And that is a very vague way to say, like, we are going to make sure in every situation that happens here, we have a very refined answer. You guys might listen to that and say, refined answer? Is Kyler Murray a refined answer? Is Geno Smith a refined answer? And I totally understand that perspective, just as someone who's watched the tape and analyzed a lot of this stuff and talked to people within the league about all of these guys. But it's pretty clear that a couple things are happening on the same front. One, this Vikings ownership group has spent a lot of cash in the last 2 years to be competitive and to contend. That hasn't happened at the highest level. And so this Vikings ownership group, I mean, this Vikings team's in a position where, you're not going to be able to go out and spend 40, 50 million on a guy at the position unless it is the most premium available options, like a Joe Burrow, who it never made sense to anybody in the outside why Cincinnati would be willing to trade Joe Burrow unless it was just a complete standoff, which it doesn't seem to be. And so the Vikings in that scenario, Vikings ownership, they want to win. They always want to be in the mix. They never have preferred the route of let's rip the Band-Aid off and either we swim where JJ McCarthy develops and he becomes the guy convincingly, or he sinks and the Vikings go 3-14 and are picking in the top 5. Like, that has never been the approach that this Vikings ownership group has wanted to take, and to shift now after 20 years would be pretty wild for my perch to see, and I don't expect that to happen. So you have that playing a role, and then you also have a superstar receiver in Justin Jefferson, who above all wants to compete, wants to contend, wants to produce, not for himself, but for, because he is an immense competitor. And then you have a coaching staff that it was a frustrating, stressful year last year for Kevin O'Connell and for a bunch of guys. Kevin O'Connell's entering his 5th season as the head coach, and going 3-14, what would that mean? It's hard to be definitive on that, but you would lose a lot of the faith that he's rightfully built up over the last 4 years with some of the job he's done. And so, if you can't acquire the long-term guarantee like a Joe Burrow, and you want to acquire the type of talent that gets you to a potential 10-11 win number, that leads you to the market that you are living in, with names like Kyler, like Geno, like Derek Carr, like Kirk Cousins, and Joe Flacco, and all of those guys. It is my belief that this staff thinks that they can get the maximum production out of any of these guys. And when I say that, I mean 3,500 yards passing plus, like that, with the conviction in the system, and the conviction in what the run game will look like with Frank Smith's addition and Keith Carter as the offensive line coach, and a lot of the pieces that are still in place. Like, this staff is very confident in what that can mean for a quarterback who lives up to and who reaches a certain talent benchmark. And I mean, just objectively, if you watch the tape, there is the level of talent for a guy like Kyler Murray is above and beyond what exists right now for a 35-year-old Geno Smith. Now, as we had Matthew Collar on the show, and he laid out the Kyler Murray argument, and one of the arguments to that is, well, what about the system fit? And that would be a fascinating kind of conversation, but it's not as if what I would say is Sam Darnold thrived throwing over the middle of the field, but that wasn't as a result of him being some elite processor. It was more just a rhythm and timing kind of orchestration. Now, would the Vikings be able to get Kyler Murray to play within that rhythm and timing? I think that's what would be fascinating about the experiment. And if they can't, he does have the playmaking chops to be able to create outside of structure. Now, the other facets at play that you guys might be yelling about to your car, or to your radio, or, to your headphones as you're listening is, well, Kyler's gotten hurt a lot over the years. He tore his ACL. He had the foot injury last year. And that is something that is going to call for questions for when you're in my seat. Okay, so you can see the vision of Kyler on a $1.3 million deal in this system, with this talent, with this motivation level. Like, you can see that path. But what is the insurance policy per se if Kyler were to get hurt? Would you be okay turning the reins over to JJ McCarthy, who I'm going to talk about in a second? Or do you feel like you need another, in many ways, layer of insurance behind that, given what the last 4 years have looked like when the starter gets hurt? So that's a lot of the dynamics in my mind as I, view this circumstance. But I think if you go back, and I did a podcast maybe a month ago where I talked about watching tape of Kyler, Geno, Kirk, Garoppolo. Derek Carr. Like I poured through probably 1,500 clips of tape of all of these guys, and Mac Jones, and as you stack all of them up, the Kyler, the flashes, the upside is above and beyond all the other guys. I mentioned Mac Jones there, but I from the outset, it has sounded like San Francisco has tried to drive a really hard bargain in trading him, and until that price tag, or if that price tag doesn't come way down, it's hard to imagine him being within the conversation. Daniel Jones, the transition tag was applied to him. Can the Vikings spend $35+ million or multi-year deal with their cap situation? You would never completely rule it out because of Rob Brzezinski's ability to be creative with solutions. But even him, you're betting on a guy coming off a torn Achilles, and while he's young and while his system fit is probably better than all the other guys we've talked about, like that is a bold bet. I said I would get into JJ McCarthy, and so we'll transition there after I drink a sip of coffee for those of you listening on audio and not watching on YouTube. So, JJ McCarthy, I've written a lot about in recent weeks, and have tried to be very clear-headed and clear-minded with just the analysis of JJ. Like the high-end flashes with JJ McCarthy are also there, and anybody who pushes back on that hasn't watched what happened over the last half of the season, the 4-game stretch over the last half of the season. The issue arises, and I've said this many times, when you're trying to develop a guy to where those high-end flashes become consistent, specifically for a 23-year-old like JJ McCarthy, like that takes time. And if ownership wants to win a certain amount, and if Kevin O'Connell, wants to win a certain amount, and this coaching staff does, and the personnel staff does as well, balancing those two worlds is why you've gotten the amount of discussion about quote unquote threading the needle, which will probably be remembered either very positively or negatively depending on how this goes. But that's why that phrasing exists, because it is a delicate dance to know that one guy needs time to develop, and an organization oftentimes doesn't have that amount of time. And that's why you see guys like Sam Darnold go on to have success later in their career. And you guys listening to this have said, and I think it's astute, and it's a testament to like the fan intelligence saying, what if we let go of JJ McCarthy, or if he never develops with us and then years down the road he does develop? And that is often the push and pull of what it is like when you have a young quarterback. Like you are hoping they come along at your timeline, and sometimes these guys just don't have the benefit of getting the correct amount of runway that they need to reach their fullest potential. So, the other component with JJ McCarthy, and I've written a lot about this, but there aren't questions about how much he cares. It's more so when, as any of us, when you're a young person, you have a lot to learn. And that has been a steeper, I would say, climb than this Vikings team and staff would want it to be at this stage. And so it leads you into just a very complex situation. And if you were to bring in a guy like Kyler Murray, you are then managing, what does that mean for JJ? Because Kyler probably isn't coming in as the ultimate mentor that a guy like Joe Flacco or Kirk Cousins would be. Kyler's coming in to prove to the world that he is a certain amount of player that he believes himself to be, that the world doesn't perceive him to be. And that's his foremost and really primary and ultimate responsibility. So with JJ McCarthy, that's what I'd say. And I've written this, but like the league, and that's executives, that's other coaches, that's agents, they all know the hurdles that have existed for this Vikings team and staff. So any reported revelations, whether I write about the team removing some of the middle of the field stuff, whether I write about the elemental aspects of the position being bigger hurdles than this team expected. Like this stuff already exists and is known by people throughout the league. It's just for me, I say this all the time. Like you try to get at the truth and the facts of it in a way that is respectful, honest, and fair. And that's, I mean, like, and JT McCarthy knows this. Like I have an immense appreciation for what he accomplished in college, for the amount of pressure he's been under, for what he's had to manage from the family side of it all. Like there is the human in me has said and written many times. I wrote it after the Detroit win, kind of in the middle part of the season. Like to see him navigate all he navigated and have that type of performance speaks volumes about the type of dude he is. So that's just what I'd say. It's this team is just in a situation where um there are difficult discussions to be had, and in the event a guy like Kyler is brought in, one of the dynamics that must be considered is the ramifications there for JJ McCarthy. So that's what I'd say on JJ, but he was similarly, just like the quarterback conversation in general, a big subject at the combine. A lot of people had thoughts, a lot of people wanted to know thoughts, and it made it hard to find time to record a podcast in Indianapolis, and that's why we're doing it now. So take a quick break here, and then I'll come back and I'll talk Greenard and some other layers of this team as part of the back half of this podcast. All right, this show is also sponsored by Unreal. That is a locally owned and operated and designed clothing brand based out of St. Paul. That is, I mean, I brought a ton of it home, and I mean, I'm passing it around to friends and family who's like, what is it? What is this stuff? And how can I get more of it? So they had a Minnesota Wild drop at the Grand Casino Arena, I believe it's called. That was just, I mean, you when you're watching what Boldy and Quinn Hughes and Kirill are doing, you're probably going to want to be repping that around the Minneapolis, St. Paul area. So really cool to partner with them throughout the entire season. They've also got some limited edition Vikings hoodies throughout the year that we showed on this podcast. So check out Unreal. The information is in the description. And yeah, let's get right back to it. We're going to talk about Jonathan Greenard. All right, so on Tuesday, Adam Schefter of ESPN reported that the Vikings were open to trading Jonathan Greenard. And it obviously received rash reaction and opinion from a lot of people. Understandably, this dude is a really talented player and has been a massive voice, an important voice internally from a leadership perspective with this Vikings team. This defense is probably going to still have to be the rock of the team. And when Jonathan Greenard is arguably probably a top 2-3 player on the defense, like that's at the bare minimum, losing Jonathan Greenard is something that I could understand would warrant a response. The way I would break the Jonathan Greenard decision now, or the Jonathan Greenard situation, is like the team and Jonathan Greenard are working through what the future of this is going to look like. Again, just to underscore it, italicize it, bold it, the Vikings love Jonathan Greenard. They know his value. The sack production, I guess you could say, hasn't been what you'd hope it to be. But Brian Flores has said many, many times, and I think it's an important one to tell you guys on the podcast. Like Brian Flores always says, if you record 10 sacks, but you play 1,000 snaps in a year, what do you do on the other 990 snaps? And how important is that? It's not to minimize the role of sacks in successful defenses, but it is to highlight the value of, on early downs, how well do you play the run? On late downs, are you creating pressure? Are you maintaining your rush lanes? Are you sharp enough? Are you fast enough to track down guys? What kind of effort are you giving? And then off the field, what type of guy are you? And Jonathan Greenard has checked every box in that aspect. And I can just say personally, like he and I in the locker room have had conversations where it's been phenomenal, where he's broached me and we have hard subjects, and that is a level of maturity that you do not see it with players all the time. So like everything with Jonathan Greenard checks out. The complication here is the fact that he is owed $19 million in cash in 2026 and 2027. I'm on overthecap.com and I'm just going to go, I'm going to count this up for you guys so you go through my process with me. So among edge rushers, 19 million in cash would be first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, in terms of the highest amount of cash edge rushers are being paid in 2026. Is Jonathan Greenard like the 14th best edge rusher in the league? That's probably debatable. His representative, Drew Rosenhaus, probably believe he deserves to be in the top 10 and maybe close to like number, I don't know, like 7. And that would put you probably around the $23 million in cash mark. In 2027, it's around that same mark. And so when Jonathan Greenard was signed, in many ways, it was kind of it wasn't a prove it deal, but it was like, okay, this is a guy who's been injured, who showed some really good flashes. And if he hits, this is going to be a good deal for us. And Jonathan Greenard has hit. He's also navigated some injuries. And now on the other side of it, 2 years later, it kind of looks like a team friendly deal. And Jonathan Greenard and Drew Rosenhaus, they have every right to ask for a certain amount of money, to believe that he is valued at a certain spot for a defense that has been as good as it's been. Like, that is a very understandable viewpoint. The Vikings are currently in a cap crunch at $45.5 million over the cap. And so to go forward or go stronger on a contract for Jonathan Greenard, that would affect their wiggle room everywhere else. And so that leads you down the road. Okay, if Jonathan Greenard wants a certain amount and the Vikings are a little tentative because of their cap situation, would another team be willing to pay Jonathan Greenard? And would they be willing to pay premium draft capital to then acquire him and pay him? Like, that is a big step. That is a sizable ask that a guy like Micah Parsons has received. A guy like, you see it around the league. Max Crosby's probably going to be in the same spot where a team pays a premium pick, and then they pay him from a monetary perspective. And like, it will probably come down to, is there going to be a team out there that has the belief in Jonathan Greenard at 28 years old, soon to be 29, to pay a serious amount of draft capital and then to also pay a premium on a new contract? What I know is, talking to people around the league, there are teams mulling the idea because there is an immense respect and faith in what Jonathan Greenard is as a player and can continue to be as a player. So that's what I'd say. Like, this is a starter for teams in terms of to at least kick it around internally. Whether or not they will eventually be able to meet the Vikings asking price, that's an entirely different conversation. But it's not as simple as the Vikings are punting on everything and they're trading their best defensive player. What are they doing? Like that? That's not the circumstance here. There's only so much leverage that Jonathan Greenard and Drew Rosenhaus have. This would be one avenue. And the Vikings have leverage in that they signed him to a multi-year deal that is where he's under contract through 2027. So how this shakes out, again, the summary, both sides are working through this thing to find the best solution, is kind of how I see it. The Dallas Turner topic surfaces within this, and over the back half of the season, as Dallas Turner started to come on, I said on the podcast that I just evaluating the tape, I felt like some of his wins were pass rush wins were quicker wins. You wanted to see more breadth of tools in his toolkit as a pass rusher. And talking to people in Indianapolis, like that still exists. There definitely is more. I mean, you could spin it one or two ways. One of it would be the fact that Dallas Turner still has a lot of development and upside is scary for the league in terms of what he could ultimately become. But it also does speak to, it's not as if in the back half of the season, Dallas Turner was a top 10 edge rusher in the NFL. That's not the case. And so the idea that it's a 1-for-1 replacement with Jonathan Greenard and Dallas Turner, that's boldly stepping out on the limb. Specifically with the early down stuff. Like Jonathan Greenard, one of his major strengths is the early down ability to set the edge and play the run. And you saw with Seattle in acquiring a guy like DeMarcus Lawrence, there is a lot of value in having a versatile guy who can play on early downs and late downs, and that you would trust specifically against a lot of heavy personnel usage that has started to come on within the league to set the edge and to hold the point there. And so that has been a developmental focus with Dallas Turner. And then again, winning against elite tackles, like that's something that is going to continue to be an evaluation point. I do wonder, and with all the positivity that existed around Dallas Turner within conversations in Indianapolis, like I do definitely wonder, okay, so if Jonathan Greenard is back, where's he playing? What does the snap count look like? Can you incorporate 3 edge rushers in some capacity? That would be a very fair question. I would also say, I mean, edge rusher in this draft is pretty loaded, and you can never have enough of them. Having another one for depth in the event of injury seems, sharp anyway. So that's kind of where I'd go from there. Jalen Naylor's market. There are a lot of teams that have been intrigued by him. Some of those teams are in the market for other positions. So how much will they ultimately spend? I think it's a very fair question. But I had one NFC evaluator say to me, like they really believes he is at least a number 2, could catch 80 passes in a season. The thing that people love about him, as much as the vertical speed and the reliability in terms of knowing a lot of positions on an offense and knowing a complex playbook like he has in Minnesota, one of the things that comes up is like he is willing to stick his face in the fan as a run blocker. You can't find that everywhere. And a lot of these offenses that are play action based, that want to be wide zone, like a lot of those teams are, they find Jalen Naylor really interesting. I wrote this like the $12 to $15 million range I expect him to get. I know the Vikings love him. I know the Vikings don't want to lose him. But if the market is there, it's probably going to be pretty difficult. Eric Wilson, I know the Vikings want to bring him back too. His market, I don't believe to be as robust as Jalen Naylor's, given that he's a 31-year-old off-ball linebacker. But Brian Flores loves him, loved him all year. And he was a great fit as a blitzer, as a guy who could move down and play a little bit of edge. Just really versatile player, really good fit. Free agency, again, the legal tampering period is going to start on Monday, and that's when you'll see a lot of the flurry of activity. Last year, and even the last 2 years, because the Vikings have spent so much cash, they've been in a lot of these big-name guys. We'll see, I would say, if I would be shocked to see the Vikings be in the mix for as many big-name guys as they've been in the last couple of years. If there are signings, I expect it to be some depth stuff of guys who are, kind of you're taking a shot one way or another on. You really like the evaluation of a cheaper player, or guys coming off an injury. Let's take a shot here to be able to spend little and potentially reap a major reward. Those are the 2 areas and markets that I expect the Vikings to be in. If Ryan Kelly is cut, I think Brandell could get an opportunity to be the guy at center. And then the Vikings the Vikings really do like a lot of the centers in the draft. So that would be a spot that I'd be looking at. I think from a receiver perspective, getting a different body type is definitely a priority. If Javon Hargrave and Jonathan Allen are cut, and Jonathan Allen is an interesting one, like you could even see a post-June cut where you spread money out for 2026 and 27. I think you'd then be looking at interior defensive line. Jalen Redmond, because he's an exclusive rights free agent, the Vikings really hold the cards there. Like they don't have to extend Jalen Redmond. I'm sure from a appreciation standpoint, like that would be something he would want. But the Vikings can take more of a short-term route if they want to. I'd say people around the league have, I was getting conversations in Indianapolis of like, man, that Redmond guy's good. Man, we love Jalen Redmond. So the, I would say the way you guys as Vikings fans view Jalen Redmond is very much reciprocated throughout the league. Aaron Jones, the cap number is, I'll just bring it up because I'm on this on overthecap.com. Aaron Jones cap number is around $14 million. His production is nowhere near that. He's still he can be trusted in pass protection, which is going to be huge for them because they also lost CJ Ham, who was a huge third down pass protecting kind of backfield mate to the quarterback. But Aaron Jones cap value is probably, I mean, it's closer to, I mean, you're talking probably around 5 million at a maximum. How amenable would he be to that level of a pay cut? I think that's where you go down the road of potentially he is cut. And then the Vikings see what's there from a running back perspective. I would say this. There is Jordan Mason has a lot of fans, but the pass protection and the lack of pass catching ability just is limiting in terms of what he can ultimately be. So that running back spot is a huge one. I mean, to think that this team is going to be in the market for a quarterback and running back just shows from an offensive perspective all that needs to be done. TJ Hawkinson's cap number is the highest of all tight ends at 21 million. He won't play on that in 2026. The question is, how far do the Vikings want to bring that down, and how willing is he to go that far? And if he's not, then that brings you to the tight end kind of questions. Safety, Jay Ward, there is a lot of faith internally with what he showed down the last 3 games of the season as an explosive guy at the line of scrimmage and even potentially deep. So his role is going to increase, no doubt about it. Harrison Smith, I still kind of see is up in the air. Towards the end of the season, it felt like everything led to he's retiring, and you understand it. It's been on a 1-year kind of situation, but the guy loves ball, and if the quarterback situation gets to a place where you create buy-in among a lot of the players, could be kind of a convincing component there. What would that look from a money perspective? I think you'd have to go down that road, but something that I've kind of eyed. And then cornerback depth is going to be a focus too. Like I think things are okay in terms of how they view Byron Murphy Jr. and Isaiah Rodgers, but the Okudah one just was kind of a whiff last year, and the Vikings know they need depth there, whether it comes in free agency or the draft. So it'll be interesting if they do sign free agents. Who do they believe in at a very low cost that they've done a really in-depth evaluation for, or who do they think from a recent injury or dip in production standpoint they can get the most out of? Like that's kind of where my eye will be beyond the quarterback, in terms of the next week and how things go. But it should be active. We'll be back later next week, obviously, with some pop-up podcasts depending on what happens. But yeah, any questions you got, throw them at me on social media, throw them at me in the comments, and we will get to as many as possible. But thank you guys for being here. Show is presented by First Resource Bank. It is sponsored by Unreal. Story at The Athletic later this week that you guys I think will find interesting. And with that, that'll do it for episode 149. We will be back very, very soon.